Storming through the desert, in less than 100 hours, these soldiers would destroy over 300 enemy tanks and armoured vehicles and take 7,000 prisoners of war. They would overrun multiple Iraqi army divisions and in doing so play a crucial role in liberating Kuwait. This is the incredible story of the British 1st Armoured Division and the Battle of Norfolk, Britain's biggest tank battle since World War II. Nowadays, outside of the British Army, the Battle of Norfolk is largely forgotten. In this massive set-piece battle, which occurred in early 1991, British tank crews and mechanised infantry overcame huge logistical challenges and extreme environmental conditions to take on one of the biggest armies in the world in their backyard. The British 1st Armoured Division would destroy approximately 120 enemy tanks and roughly double that number of armoured and support vehicles. During that time, incredibly, they would not lose a single Challenger 1 main battle tank, and they would set the record for the world's longest range successful tank kill. However, before we get to that story, it's important to understand why nearly 60,000 British personnel from the military were deployed to the Middle East in the first place. Following Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait on the 2nd of August 1990, the United Kingdom, alongside a coalition of nearly 40 nations, pledged military support to liberate Kuwait and compel Iraqi forces to withdraw from their occupation. This commitment marked the beginning of a major international effort to restore sovereignty and uphold international law. Over the coming months, a huge Allied military build-up would occur in the region. Confusingly, there's a lot of terminology which is banded around for the First Gulf War. Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Operation Granby, Operation Sabre. So I'm going to read this extract out for you, which defines each operation and the stage that it was, so it makes it clear for you to understand as we go on into the video. The Americans and broader historical records refer to the initial phase of the Gulf War as Desert Shield, followed by the air and ground offensive known as Desert Storm. The specific ground element was named Operation Sabre. In contrast, the United Kingdom designated its military involvement entirely as Operation Granby. Interestingly, the British military assigns operation names using a computer-generated system, therefore ensuring the designation remains unrelated to the actual mission. I didn't know that, that's quite interesting. The name Granby originates from John Manners, Marquess of Granby, an 18th century British military commander renowned for his leadership during the 7 Years' War. There's quite a few pubs named after the old chap too. I've seen the insides of a few of them. The land component of Granby and also Desert Storm were both named Desert Sabre. In addition to ships and air power, Britain's principal contribution to the Allied effort was the British 1st Armoured Division. Based in Germany, this consisted of 2 brigades, the 4th Armoured Brigade and the 7th Armoured Brigade, who were also known as the Desert Rats. Having spent the previous 40 years training and planning for a Soviet invasion of Central Europe, for the troops on the ground, this pivot to the Middle East came as a shock. Many of the regiments in these 2 brigades belonged to the prestigious Old Grand Cavalry regiments that had fought in the Crimea in the charge of the Heavy and Light Brigades. The division was commanded by Major General Rupert Smith, who in turn was commanded by General Peter de la Bellière, the overall Commander-in-Chief of British forces in the war. Known as a soldier scholar, Major General Sir Rupert Smith was at the time 47 years old, a recipient of the Queen's Gallantry Medal and an ex-parachute regiment officer. 1st Armoured Division was immediately reinforced with supplemental units, bringing its total complement to just under 30,000 personnel, out of a total British commitment in the region of 53,000. The sheer scale of the operation and short time window to deploy presented huge logistical challenges. It didn't help that reportedly the British government, believing a Middle Eastern conflict would never occur in the near future, during the 1980s had sold off most of the British Army's uniforms of desert camouflage to guess who? Iraq. You couldn't script it. This led to a temporary shortage of desert camouflage uniforms, so many troops initially had to deploy to the region in their traditional European theatre DPMs. In Germany, troops desperately ran around cannibalising spare parts for tanks, repainting vehicles desert pink, and packing supplies. The two principal vehicles of the 1st Armoured Division were the Challenger 1 main battle tank and the Warrior infantry fighting vehicle. The Challenger 1 was a world-class weapon. At the time, only the US Abrams tank could compete with it. Clearly, the whole operation was just going to be one logistical headache. 7th Armoured Brigade's Chief of Staff stated, "No Staff College exercise author could have written such a fanciful scenario. Your brigade has been stationed in northern Germany for 40 years, training and operating with the tactically cosy matrix of the General Defensive Plan. During the next 26 days, your establishment is to treble in size. You are to move your strategically immobile main battle tanks to Saudi Arabia in order to counter Iraqi aggression. Oh, and by the way, the first ships leave in 14 days. However, when the chips are down is when the British military is at its best. By October 1990, just 2 months after Saddam's invasion, with its tanks shipped from Bremerhaven, 7th Armoured Brigade left Germany for the Middle East. By the beginning of that month, 43,000 British troops had arrived in theatre and were continuing to build up. The majority of army troops arrived at Al Jabal port and were initially assigned to large hangars for accommodation. In those first few weeks, thousands of men were cramped into tiny spaces and beset with humidity and heat, brought in by the Shamal wind along the Persian Gulf coast. Just as an indicator to make you aware of the sheer logistical nightmare involved in this entire complex operation, for 7th Armoured Brigade alone, their force maintenance area at Al Jabal port needed to provide accommodation for 13,000 personnel as well as real estate for 5,000 vehicles and dump stocks. With British and American forces arriving at the port, as ever, a close relationship blossomed between the two forces. US Marines first assisted the British armoured troops with supplies, such as rations. Showing gratitude to the Leathernecks, the tankers helped celebrate the US Marines' birthday by lending them their bandsmen, who helped play a few tunes. However, the sudden change in diet from egg banjos and chips did come as a surprise to a few squaddies. Apparently, many British soldiers weren't too chipper with the US MREs. Known as grippers, they were called that name due to their alleged ability to bring on constipation. No doubt the British were to be relieved when their endless supplies of chocolate, tea and biscuits arrived from the NAFI stores, which soon came. Reportedly, 12,000 jars of Marmite were shipped over to boost morale. I'm not sure it would have boosted my morale, but you either love it or you hate it, I suppose. It would be really interesting to hear from British or American veterans who were there at the time and what they thought of the MREs. So please let me know in the comments. It'd be quite interesting to see what both sides thought of their own ration packs. However, in true American fashion, a McDonald's, basketball court and other wonderful amenities were soon set up. This left the British soldiers in awe, and their morale tent, which consisted of a sad ping-pong table and some books and board games, could hardly compete. In true British improvisation style, I've heard of one anecdote where squaddies started bulk buying dairy milk chocolate bars, and it wasn't for the love of a sweet tooth. Vehicle commanders have been instructed to use the silver foil from the wrappers to put on sticks on the right-hand side of tracks of vehicles as they pass through the breach of the enemy front line. After mine vehicles had cleared the route for tanks, the lights of the vehicles would reflect off the wrappers and indicate they were on the right track to following vehicles. It'd be interesting to see if any veterans are watching who can confirm if this is true or not. Like the British, I've had to improvise here with dairy, milk, chocolate buttons. I'm not sure why my mother still sends me these every Easter, but old habits die hard, I guess. By the 8th of January 1991, 95% of the 1st Armoured Division was in theatre. Once all assets were in place and fully arrived and reinforced, the division's order of battle consisted of the 4th Armoured Brigade, which was reinforced with engineers and artillery. This was tasked with breakout operations and clearing the ground at the breach of enemy lines. The 7th Armoured Brigade, which consisted of a greater proportion of main battle tanks, was assigned for heavy tank-on-tank engagement. Due to space limitations on the image, I've left out elements of the 17th 21st Lancers, who were also integrated into units of the 7th Armoured Brigade. Thousands of divisional troops and further infantry battalions, such as Guards regiments, were also assigned into support roles. Their main function would be rear area security, such as mopping up any suspected remaining isolated pockets of resistance once the two brigades had punched forward and advanced, and also prisoner of war handling. Strategically, the main role of the 1st British Armoured Division was to look after the right flank of 7 Corps, whom it was attached to, and protect it as it went north and east to engage Iraqi forces, and finally destroy the Republican Guard. Once this had been completed, the main Basra highway was then to be secured north of Mutla Ridge. After a few weeks in Al Jabal, waiting for the tanks and other logistical equipment to arrive, the tankers and infantrymen were finally allowed to redeploy to the desert to begin training. This came as a relief to many of the personnel fed up in the cramped conditions. For 5 months, the Allied forces built up on the Saudi border with Iraq and Kuwait, and diplomatic negotiations continued. In the meantime, the troops, many of them newly arrived into either brigade and having to be integrated, had to learn to train and operate together, polishing up on their TTPs, or tactics, techniques and procedures. Camels wandering around firing ranges were a particular annoyance to the training tankers. As per all British forces, training was interrupted for regular brews, i.e. tea breaks. New equipment such as dust filters arrived and were added to the tanks. In their spare time, soldiers wrote blueys or letters. Remember, this was the time before the internet. If they were lucky, got an occasional phone call once a week home, and also played cards or board games. However, they would also indulge in that favourite hobby and pastime of the British military, banter or relentless mickey-taking of each other. This was the glue which held together the morale of the British forces. Endless NBC drills occurred over the threat of a chemical or biological attack from Saddam. British and Allied troops sweated in NBC suits in drills. In one incident, a British tank crew even had a game of cricket in full NBC suits, using camouflage net poles and spare track parts to create makeshift cricket stumps. Gas, gas, gas became a familiar term that every British soldier there would recognise and have to react to. To counter the threat of germ warfare posed by Saddam's army, troops were required to take a concoction of inoculations. When the commander of 7th Armoured Brigade inquired about these and had they tested anyone back in England, he was quoted as saying, "The MOD responded, there was a pig that was running around Portland Down that looked extremely well." That wasn't encouraging. Whilst this was going on, the Iraqis continued their preparations of defensive positions across the border. The majority of Iraqi heavy armour consisted of Soviet mid-20th century era tanks such as the T-55 and T-62. The Iraqis were not to be underestimated. Many units were battle-hardened by years of war with Iran, and the elite Republican Guard held more modern equipment and had a high morale. Luckily, during the 1980s, many in the Army senior leadership, led by the former Chief of General Staff, Sir Nigel Thomas Bagnall, had studied the modern Arab-Israeli tank warfare of the post-World War II era. They had learned and adapted new operational and tactical doctrine in armour, which was taken from the Israelis. This shifted focus from static defensive battle to mobile offensive manoeuvre operations. The concept of follow-on forces attack would be crucial in the coming offensive. The Iraqis relied on the Soviet doctrine of defence in depth, building up a series of fortified positions along the Iraqi and Kuwaiti border with Saudi Arabia that included minefields, barbed wire and sand berms, all defended behind multiple divisions of either infantry or armour, loosely based with forces positioned in a zigzag or triangular structure. The strategic reserve were the elite Republican Guard, who would repel any breakthroughs. Saddam believed if the Iraqis inflicted as many casualties as possible on Western nations, it would compel them to offer peace terms. With talks breaking down between Iraq and the international community, by January 1991, it was clear that kinetic action and a ground offensive would be needed. Under the command of General Norman Schwarzkopf, nicknamed Storm in Norman, the Allied coalition devised a bold left hook manoeuvre to outflank Iraqi forces. 7 Corps would play a crucial role in the strategy, sweeping north and east to engage the Iraqi army and destroy the elite Republican Guard. To deceive Iraqi leadership, the Allies launched an extensive disinformation campaign, making it appear as though their primary objective was liberating Kuwait but not entering any Iraqi territory. As part of this deception, US Marines staged a fake amphibious assault, keeping Iraqi forces focused on coastal defences. Psychological operations or PSYOPs teams broadcast recordings of tank movements near the Iraqi border, confusing enemy troops. Fake radio transmissions reinforced the illusion of a southern invasion through Kuwait. Propaganda leaflets were scattered over Iraqi positions, eroding morale and encouraging them to surrender. The defensive phase of Operation Desert Shield, which began on the 2nd of August 1990, ended on the 17th of January 91. The combat phase began on the same day with Operation Desert Storm, starting with a massive aerial campaign designed to soften up Iraqi positions. This campaign lasted for about 6 weeks. In the 1st Armoured Division, final preparations were underway. On the 28th of January, Major General Smith issued his directive to the troops. Our purpose is the defeat of the enemy's mobile forces. To achieve this, we must destroy his armoured, mechanised and artillery units, and his HQs. We are not fighting for ground. G-Day for the ground offensive, known as Operation Sabre, was announced for the 24th of February. At the start of the operation, a huge artillery barrage on the forward lines of Iraqi positions unleashed around 90,000 artillery rounds over 3.5 hours. The British armoured troops, along with their American colleagues in 7 Corps, prepared for action. After the Padre held communion and blessed their tanks, the tank crews wrote their final farewell letters and handed them to the adjutant for safekeeping on the event of their death. They then mounted up and moved to the staging areas near the border. Deploying to their staging area, the British would begin their advance at the head of 7 Corps at 15:15 hours on G+1 on the 25th of February. On the battle radio net, in the best tradition of the cavalry, the commander of the Royal Hussars sounded off his hunting horn, and the tankers and infantry began passing through US troops on the front line. In the words of Tim Purbrick, then a young captain and troop commander, we came across a camel herder who was driving his camels across our front. D Squadron of the Royal Hussars Battle Group was the lead squadron. We were the point of the spear, and so we stopped to allow the camel herder to push his camels across our front so he didn't mess his life up, and then we carried on. That's so very British. Soon, and for the coming 2 days, Purbrick and his oppos were in continuous tank engagements as they advanced to contact. On the first day of the British battle, the 1st Armoured Division successfully engaged the western flank of the 48th Iraqi Infantry Division. In nighttime combat, the division was destroyed, and its commander, a brigadier general, was captured by the British. Overnight, the British cleared 2 lines of enemy positions in close combat, destroying several companies of T-55 tanks. A British Challenger 1 tank also ended up taking the record for the longest tank-to-tank kill in military history at 2.9 miles or 4.7 kilometres. Focusing on maintaining mobility and combat momentum, the tank troops were unable to take prisoners, leaving them for the infantry to hold on and process. Tank crews would crush the POWs' weapons under their tracks to ensure they could not be used on second echelon troops or mistaken for fighting soldiers by the British side. In line with Geneva Conventions, the Iraqi prisoners were treated with respect. All wounded were cared for equally. The majority of frontline Iraqi divisions, being regular army or conscripts, began to surrender, especially after seeing their armoured vehicles destroyed. During the fighting, sometimes it rained, and intermittent foggy conditions further hampered operations. Dust clouds and localised storms also occurred on various days. Sand could quickly change into slimy mud after a downpour. Troops stated that the sheer noise from the artillery and aerial operations ongoing at the time gave them little opportunity to snatch any precious moments of sleep in their cramped vehicles. On the 26th of February, as many of their American colleagues were engaged in the nearby Battle of 73 Easting against the Iraqi Republican Guard, British artillery unleashed a long artillery barrage on Iraqi positions in the greatest British artillery display since World War II. These included MLRS missiles. Imagine just being a poor Iraqi conscript who doesn't want to be there, being hit by all this firepower. It just doesn't bear thinking about. The 7th Brigade then engaged the 52nd Armoured Division. This was near Objective Norfolk, which became known as the Battle of Norfolk. In around 90 minutes, the brigade wiped out 50 Iraqi tanks and APCs. The 4th Armoured Brigade destroyed the HQ and artillery belonging to 107th Brigade of the 48th Infantry Division, with British infantry engaging the Iraqi 803rd Infantry Brigade, clearing defensive positions. In all of this, British tank crews were reportedly known for brewing up teas, sometimes even in the middle of combat. Troops would have to deal with the threat of mines, UXO or unexploded ordnance, booby traps and Iraqi mortar fire. Battle replenishment vehicles would follow close up to the front line to replenish the tanks and armoured fighting vehicles with rations, extra ammo and other supplies. A tragic blue-on-blue incident then occurred. A Warthog A-10 destroyed 2 British Warrior APCs, killing 9 Fusiliers and wounding several more soldiers. Clearly heartbreaking and frustrating to all sides concerned, the British still had a job to do and cracked on. On the 27th of February, the division then began to swing east, towards Kuwait. Pockets of action still occurred, and just before 1100 hours, a British Scorpion vehicle recce unit, marking out an operational boundary area, was hit by another blue-on-blue from an American armoured unit and suffered 2 wounded. When the US personnel realised their mistake, they assisted with the treatment of the injured British soldiers and their evacuation to hospital. Elements of the division then reached Wadi al-Batin. According to British parliamentary documents, 2 other more minor blue-on-blue incidents did also occur between British units, separately on the 26th and 27th of February. There were no fatalities in each case. With thousands of moving vehicles and aerial platforms, dust clouds and poor visibility, the risk of these incidents was always high. By the final morning on 28th of February, orders came to the armoured regiments of 7th Armoured Brigade to advance in line and move 40 kilometres in about an hour to the Basra Road running between Kuwait City and the Iraqi city of Basra to meet the UN deadline which was set for the end of the war. Charging across a featureless terrain, the soldiers reached their intended position just in time for the ceasefire. Total casualties suffered by the 1st British Armoured Division, with 15 dead and 43 wounded. Incredibly, not one Challenger 1 tank was lost. It's estimated that between 20 to 50,000 Iraqi soldiers lost their lives. Many were not brutal Baathists or fanatics like the Republican Guard. It's hard not to feel compassion for many of these soldiers, poor conscripts with no loyalty to Saddam's regime and forced to fight on pain of imprisonment or worse. Many were poor Shia recruits forced into the army. Many of their brethren in the south of Iraq would rise up against Saddam in the coming months after the war. Although we focused on the British in this video, it is important to recognise the incredible efforts and achievements as well as the sacrifices made by all nations' militaries who participated in this campaign to liberate Kuwait. It's a fascinating conflict to research, and if you've got this far and are a veteran, I'd be really interested to read of your experiences in the comments, and not just what you think of the MREs. Being a medals channel, I've done a roundup of some common campaign and gallantry awards that were issued to British troops in the 1st Armoured Division during the course of this campaign. Gulf Medal, US Legion of Merit for senior commanders such as Major General Smith. Liberation of Kuwait medals issued by the Kuwaiti and Saudi Arabian governments. The Order of King Abdul Aziz 2nd and 3rd class, again this was issued to senior British commanders. Distinguished Service Order, Military Cross, Military Medal and Distinguished Conduct Medal. Not to mention in dispatches, bronze and silver oak leaves. In 1993, a lot of these medals would be phased out or merged in new reforms. Ironically, many soldiers from both sides would meet again in battle in just over a decade. The first Gulf War would lead to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The lessons learned in Operation Granby and Desert Storm would lead to the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003, becoming slicker and quicker. So I've used a variety of sources for this video. The most useful are the MOD British Army Review, the Gulf War Volume 1, Tim Purbrick's blog on the official British Army blog website. It's definitely worth a read of Purbrick's account of the actual battle itself and the build-up to it. It's fascinating stuff. And also the BFBS podcast, to name but a few. But they're the three main ones which are really good and fascinating, and there's a lot of key information there as well. So I'd just like to say that obviously this video has focused on the British 1st Armoured Division and their contribution to the Gulf War. So that's not to detract or to make redundant any other Allied nations' huge contributions to this effort, especially the Americans. So the purpose of this video really is to just explore this war from a unique British perspective through our tankers and infantry armoured fighting vehicle personnel. Thanks for watching. I hope you found some value from this, and I'll see you in the next one.